أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين. So I want to welcome everybody after their beautiful suhoor that the Prophet ﷺ taught us all that there is a big blessing in our morning meal before dawn. And alhamdulillah, may Allah bless everybody's day to be a rich day of fasting and spiritual devotion and reading Quran. And inshallah, we will now talk a little bit about the inspirational stories of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, as Imam al-Kandahlawi put in his masterpiece, Hayatul Sahaba, the lives of the companions, some 2,500 pages worth of beautiful, amazing stories about the lives of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So I want to start with a story that I'm not endorsing its actual theme because I can tell from studying it that basically some of the younger companions had a little bit of zealousness, but it's an interesting story about a man named Amr ibn al-Jumuh. Amr ibn al-Jumuh was one of the nobles of Medina. And he was one of those who were very wealthy, has a large family, and only, a handful of his family ended up embracing Islam. And so actually his son Mu'adh ibn Amr ibn al-Jumuh was one of the 72 who actually went and made their pledge to the Prophet ﷺ at Aqaba before the Hijrah. And so the Muslims had just migrated from Mecca to Medina, and Mu'adh is the son of Amr ibn al-Jumuh, and he happened to meet Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, and he had become close friends with him. It appears as though that they noticed they have the same name, and so they became good friends. And Mu'adh, ibn Amr, the son of this nobleman who is still a polytheist, he's one of those who remain on polytheists, and only a few people from his family have become Muslim. Over a year ago, Mu'adh brought up to him, that why are we worshiping this idol? They have this idol, they're calling him Manat. It appears as though that was a name that they would call after the well-known large idol called Manat. And so Mu'adh ibn Amr, he told his dad, he says, he's a teenager. He says, Dad, why are we worshiping this statue here in the house? Why do we wash him every day? And why do we pray to him? It seems he needs us more than we need him. And his dad got very upset with him. And he, said, I don't want to hear one word of this again. And Mu'adh was a bit concerned, so he didn't bring it up. He didn't want to ruin his relationship with his father. So Mu'adh one time was walking with Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the great companion of the Prophet, who at that time, by the way, would have been about 19, 20 years old himself. So they're young Muslims, and they're talking with each other, and they used to spend some time in the night walking around, Medina and just hanging out or whatever. And then Mu'adh ibn Amr, the son of this nobleman of the polytheists of Medina, he said, look, these idols are, of no use. They have no value. They are not holy or sacred. We know this. This is a fact. My dad is a rational man. My dad is a reasonable man. We just have to appeal to his intellect. So what shall we do? And Mu'adh ibn Jabal, he suggested that, maybe if we can hide him. And Mu'adh ibn Amr, he said, no, I think we should do more than that, just so we can see how ridiculous it is. So Mu'adh ibn Jabal said, okay, whatever you want to do, I'm with you. So late that night, they took the idol and they went out to the area known as the Gha'it, al-Adhr al-Nas. What this is basically, back then they don't have plumbing, obviously, so their bathroom, as it were, was basically an area, kind of, maybe there would be a small fence around it, but there would be an area where people would go, and then they would, seclude themselves so that they could use the bathroom, as it were. And so they took this idol and they went in there and they put its head down inside of where some urine and feces are. And so they just they went back, and then he went to sleep in the house, and the next day, whenever Amr gets up, he gets up to do his morning prayers to the idol, and he finds the idol is not there. So he's obviously very upset and bothered about this, and he goes looking around here and there, and then he uses the bathroom. And whenever he goes to use the bathroom, he sees that this is his idol right there. He says, "What is this?" And he has a large house, and there's many people living in his house. And so he wouldn't imagine that anyone in his house would do this, by the way, because the hadith does not mention that he threatens anyone. He says, "What has happened? What kind of sick person, has one of these Muslim people come here to do this, And so, of course, he has no evidence for any of that. And Mu'adh, his son, is secretly friends with Mu'adh bin Jabal. Like, they hang out in the nighttime when nobody knows, because he knows how his dad feels, and he's been hiding his belief for almost a year. So then again, it happened a couple of days later. They decided to do it again in the night. And they did the exact same thing. They took the idol, put him head down in where the feces and urine is over there. And so on the second time, this is, completely, unacceptable to him. And interestingly enough, later on that day, when he was in Medina, somebody introduced him to Mus'ab ibn Umair. And Mus'ab ibn Umair, talked about the Prophet ﷺ in just a general introduction of Islam. And he said, "What does he teach?" And Mus'ab, all he was talking about was Surah Al-Fatiha. He just explained to him Surah Al-Fatiha. He read it to him and explained what it's all about, and La ilaha illallah, and what we're doing, and what it means to be a Muslim, and needing the guidance of Allah and none other. And so then he said, "It's interesting, but I will have to talk to my idol." Interestingly enough, he starts to think, but what's this thing? What are these people? Some of these people are doing this to my idol. I know this. And he's looking at the idol like it's a god, like it has powers or something, or like it's divine. So actually it was, a couple of days later, he went to his idol and said, "Look, if you're really a god, you need to protect yourself." And so then he hangs his sword. He puts a sword on the neck of this idol. So we're assuming now, if he's hanging a sword on the idol, because it says he hanged it around his neck, this is like a pretty good sized statue, And so that night he goes to sleep, and then the next night, Mu'adh, his son Mu'adh, tells Mu'adh bin Jabal, "We have to show him, because now he's put the sword on the idol, and it looks ridiculous, and I don't even know what my father is thinking." And so Mu'adh bin Jabal is concerned, this is getting, I guess, a little bit too far. And so then they were walking, and they found that there was a dead dog in the area. And so, this is obviously not anything anybody would want to be around. For whatever reason, they drugged the dead dog, which is not a good idea at all for anybody to do, to touch any dead animal. But they did that. And then they put it into the area where there's the filth. And so now what they did was they wrapped the dead dog around the upside down idol of Manat. So the next day, same thing happened, and Amr comes out, and he sees that the sword is still in the house, and now this idol is wrapped around a dead dog in the feces and urine. So he came to his conclusion on that day that this cannot be a god. So obviously these methods, and he became a devout Muslim, and he lived his life as a believer for many years after that. And continued throughout the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar and so forth. And he was a righteous man after that. So the story is, he just came back to the Muslims and told them, I don't know why we worship these idols. They have no benefit. They can't defend themselves. And so it just took him this episode to realize how ridiculous their beliefs were. And so his son turned out to be right. Now, that being said, we're making a caveat here that this is not necessarily the ideal Islamic behavior. And I'm sure, somebody does this, everybody has the right to their beliefs, right? But this is something that happened in the family, and this is his son, and he loves him, and he's trying to basically pull from. I'm sure he's heard verses of the Quran about Abraham alayhi salam, peace and blessings be upon him, and we know what Abraham did. So he's drawing from some prophetic legacy and making his own ijtihad, making his own decision about how he wants to do that. So I wanted to mention a couple of other amazing stories as well, and that is a lot of people, actually, to be honest with you, I didn't realize this until I was studying it yesterday, that when Omar first came out as a believer, and then he went in front of everybody and told them, I'm going to say most all Sirah books are very protective of the great position of Omar, and so they make it like nobody had a problem with him. No, actually, when Omar, it is authentically transmitted in Bukhari, as well as Ibn Kathir puts it in Bidayah wa Nihaya, and it has its basis in the authentic hadiths. And so basically he went out there and he says, look, I'm Umar ibn Khattab min Bani Adi, and I am a Muslim, and I am La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And he went out in front of the Quraysh and did that. But before he left there, some people came and they surrounded him, like 10 of them, and they started talking to him, and he hit one of them in their face. And then they all jumped on him and started beating him, and he was beating them. And like 3 or 4 of them were knocked out cold. But then he himself had many, and they actually pinned him down. And then until Al-As ibn Wa'il, the famous elder amongst Quraysh, the father of Amr ibn al-As, he came up and he said, what are you guys doing here with Omar? And, you know, what kind of trouble are you looking to get yourselves in? And then Omar pulled himself free and said, you know, these guys are trying to mock me because I'm a believer, you know. And they said, you know, Omar has left his ways of his family and all of that. And then Al said, do you think that Bani Adi is just going to let you do this to him? If this is, you know, the man is a noble amongst us. We respect him. And so he has every right to believe whatever he wants. And you're only going to put yourself in danger by causing any harm to him. So it says that Omar suffered some serious injuries on that day, like many of the companions did. And then finally, I just want to kind of touch on an amazing story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. And this is actually the story of the first mosque built by Muslims at all. This is long before Quba and the migration. So this hadith is also narrated by Imam al-Bukhari, as told to us by Aisha radiallahu anha. It's interesting how Aisha is telling this story, because people who challenge the age of Aisha in terms of marriage and all of that, they use this hadith, and it's in Bukhari, by the way. And it says that Aisha says, "Lam aqil an abawayya illa yadinuna din al-Islam, yadina din al-Islam." That I don't remember any time in my parents' life except for that they were Muslims, right? Abu Bakr and his wife. And so Aisha is saying that I remember that they were Muslims, and the Prophet used to come to our house every day, and he would visit us and talk to us. And she says, I remember that just after the main group of Muslims have gone to Habasha, to Ethiopia, to take asylum under the Christian king, is at around that same time that Abu Bakr went to come to defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they beat him so bad that his whole face was bloody and so badly injured, and they, you know, basically resolved that, you know, they were all, you know, complicit in trying to attack him severely, and so Abu Bakr, you know, resolved that he was going to go ahead and make the migration to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia. And so Abu Bakr gathered up all of his belongings, and then he left. Now, the interesting thing about this is this would have been in the 6th year of the prophethood, according to all of the historians. So this was the 6th year of the prophethood, and so this would have been 7 years before the migration. So according to the marriage hadith that everybody's, you know, always defending, that would mean Aisha was not even born, or just born by days, and she's remembering the story and narrating it to us. So this is a little bit of a doubtful issue on that whole on the age of the marriage hadith, because it just doesn't add up with this hadith, which is also in Bukhari. Yeah. So Abu Bakr takes all of his belongings, he goes out and he goes on his journey, and he is, you know, leaving Mecca for Ethiopia to seek asylum under the Christian king. So after a day or two of a journey, maybe probably 20, 30 miles or whatever, he comes upon a group of Ahabish. And these Ahabish, these are the people who live kind of like Bedouin, but they're kind of like a large tribe. And they live a little bit south of Mecca before you get to the Red Sea, where you can go over to Ethiopia. And so Ibn ad-Daghina is one of their nobles and elders amongst them. And so then he sees Abu Bakr with all of his stuff on his camel, and he says, "What are you going? I usually see you on a caravan, that you're going on some sort of a journey in your caravan." And he said, "Well, the Quraysh have attacked me, and you see my injuries, and so I'm just going to live in Ethiopia and live in peace, worshiping God as I know Him, and I'm not going to go through with this anymore." And so then he said, "This is crazy." He says, "Inna mithlaka la yakhruju wa la yukhraj." The type of person that we know you to be. And he has had business dealings with Abu Bakr in his caravan before, when they would go to Yemen, which is south of there. Ibn Daghina and his tribe have dealt with Abu Bakr. And he was a very noble man of good character, not just a noble man of wealth, as many of them looked at it, but his manners and his character. And so then it's interesting, because in this authentic hadith here, narrated by Imam al-Bukhari, the way that Ibn Daghina, and I didn't realize this until I read this hadith, that he basically defends Abu Bakr with this phrase: إنك تكسب المعدوم وتصل الرحم وتحمل الكل وتقري الضيف وتعين على نوائب الحق وأنا لك الجار يا أبا بكر يا أبا قحافة. He says, and this is, if you remember it, this is the same exact statement that Khadija made to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, same exact words. When he came down from the cave and he was concerned that Angel Gabriel maybe was some demon or something like that. He didn't know what he was dealing with. And so then she said, you're the type person that when people are without something, you will go make sure that they have what they need, and that you take care of your family's best interests, and that you take care of people who are going through difficulties, and that you are the most hospitable to your guests, and that you help people who are going through oppression and misfortune. And so it was based upon this that Ibn ad-Daghina gave some asylum to Abu Bakr. So he said, "Abu Bakr, look, you come with me. I'll work out a deal. You have all your stuff. You have some wealth. Why go all the way to Ethiopia? This is Mecca. I know you don't want to leave." And so Abu Bakr agreed. He said, "Okay, fine. Let's see what happens." So Ibn ad-Daghina and Abu Bakr went back into Mecca, and they went into the area around the Kaaba, and Ibn ad-Daghina made an agreement, a pact, a contract of asylum with the Quraysh tribes. He said, "Look, Abu Bakr, you guys know he's a noble man. He's a respected man. He has never done any wrong to anyone, and I'm going to give him asylum." And so the agreement that they drew up was, well, he cannot come around here. We don't want him here. If he's leaving, let him leave. So basically they were buying into Abu Bakr's desire to leave. And so then he said, no, he's going to have a house on the far south end of Mecca, far away from, maybe a couple of miles from where he's, where his family lives, Aisha and so forth, whoever else is there, with Asma and his wife and so forth. So then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, sets up, like a little house on the outskirts of Mecca. And basically the deal was Abu Bakr cannot go around teaching about Islam and teaching people about the religion and things like that. And because many people have lost their way through this man, Abu Bakr. That's how they were saying, the Quraysh. So then Ibn ad-Daghina said, yes, you can worship your Lord. It's between you and your Lord. God will decide what happens with the rest of the people, but I'm putting you in my asylum. So then Abu Bakr was spending his time there in the south area of Mecca, and he built a small mosque out in front of his house. So he would have had like a house that would be like the size of maybe 2 rooms in anybody's house today. Maybe the size of your kitchen and your living room, perhaps. And so he then built a wall outside in the front, as it were, in the old time. They don't have rain there, so I guess, I love praying outside, on the mountains and out in the parks and things like that, being with creation when you pray. I think that was Abu Bakr's idea, radiallahu anh. So he built a mosque out there, and he used to go out there, and in the nights and in the early morning at Fajr time, he would read lots of Quran, and he would cry, and he would be passionate when he was reading it. And so then the story went around South Mecca that some of the children and some of the women would kind of go over there and listen. And then some of the husbands would beat the women and the kids because they're all saying how amazing the sound of this Quran is, and what it means, and how powerful it is, and what life is really all about. And so then basically the Quraysh got very upset. They came to Abu Bakr with a whole, group, a herd of angry, Quraysh. And they said, look, we're kicking you out of here. This is enough. You and your ways, and trying to influence everybody, and coming out reading all loud and crying with your magical recitation of your prophet. And so then they went to Ibn Daghina. Ibn Daghina came in, and Ibn Daghina, he's a polytheist himself, it appears. And so he said, look, Abu Bakr, I'm sorry, but you have broken this thing, and so I cannot give you asylum anymore. You're going to have to go. So then Abu Bakr traveled to Ethiopia and spent a couple of years over there. So we see the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and their beautiful truth. From the young, zealous Muslim who's trying to utilize reason and be a little bit clever to prove his dad, from Umar's strength of faith once he had read some of the Quran and looked into his heart and changed his direction of his heart, and then Allah's blessing him with this pride, but then willing to go through punishment and difficulty. And now we see Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, how he was so influential no matter where he was, and how he was so dedicated that when he had the opportunity and he felt like he had some seclusion, he built a mosque to pray in, so that he could have at his house a place that is directly, specifically designated for prayer and worship and reading Quran and remembrance and all of that. Radiallahu anhum ajma'in, may Allah bless us to be their followers and to emulate their example. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.